Today, I'm going to take a hard stance against the phrasing compartmentalizing and bottling it up because I don't think that's actually what's happening. So, if you will, put on your kindergarten to middle school brain with me so that this is more humorous than it is gross. I think that in all of those circumstances where we talk about compartmentalizing or bottling it up and then having it explode, what's actually happening is that you're emotionally constipated. What I like about this language is, even though it's kind of gross, it lines up a lot better with what's actually happening. And it causes us to think about our intake, our digestion of emotional situations, of our emotions themselves, as well as how we process and release some of those feelings. The feelings that we hold on to or try to hide away because they're stinky, they're uncomfortable, because they're kind of gross. We don't want everybody to see it. All of those things. You see what I'm saying? Like, the metaphor works out really nicely in the way that gives us some practical understanding of what to do next, that terms like compartmentalizing or bottling it up don't actually help us with. So bear with me as we talk about a gross concept and tie it to our emotional wellness. This idea, I think, has a lot of validity in the analogy because when we think about these two things, the space of being emotionally stuck or emotionally numb, or when we know that there's stuff that we're not dealing with, or we are in this place of just compounding emotional states where one thing happens and we explode in a way that is not actually appropriate given the circumstance. What's actually happening is there's such a buildup in your emotional gut that we aren't just dealing with that situation, that one thing that you took in. We're dealing with maybe months worth of stuff that is just in your emotional gut that needs to come out in order for us to be healthy. Another thing that's interesting with constipation that I think aligns with this idea of emotional constipation is that you can have a normal poop while you're constipated, and it can, at times, seem like you're all good to go. You're not, though. And I think that when we start thinking about things in one dimension, we lose so much. We have to be thinking about what are the nutrients emotionally that we are consuming and how are those being digested in our hearts and our minds and our spirits. And then what are we doing to allow some of these emotions out? It's not always going to look like what went in, right? I might consume some really sad stuff, and what comes out isn't tears, but instead it's laughter, because that's what I need to release in order to be able to process through that sad movie that I watched. One of the ways that we become constipated, I think, is by delaying our processing or delaying our response. So we can go into survival mode and then we don't have to deal with what we're struggling with or the event. And this lines up with the pooping analogy where I might not be in a place where I can poop right now. I'm in the middle of a recording. That's not an optimal time, even though I could cut. I'm going to wait, if I have to, maybe an hour, maybe 30 minutes. I might even wait until I get home because that's a more comfortable place for me to do that. And all of that is pretty reasonable, depending on the urgency, depending on the intensity of those sensations that you're receiving from your emotional gut. That might be an appropriate amount of time to delay this emotional pooping. However, that doesn't mean that I'm waiting until the next day or the day after or next week or next month or until that vacation, because just like with actual constipation, things are going to get worse if I continue to delay and push things back. There comes a point where that urgency is either going to catch up with me, or in my opinion, worse, I start just feeling sick and I don't really know why. And when that occurs, it is helpful to pull somebody else in to be able to examine and ask the questions and who might know what's going on. But when we think about when was the last time that I let out my feelings, that I did something that felt expressive of my feelings? That doesn't just have to be sitting alone in my room crying, or even even though it's a good option, sitting with a friend and letting them know all of the feelings that I have. Sometimes this can be journaling. All of those can be forms of this emotional expression that allows us to let out the feelings that we're sitting with. One of the best ways for us to prevent emotional constipation is going to be being mindful of what we are consuming. A lot of us don't think about our emotional diets. Are we consuming just sad songs? Are we just consuming happy songs? As with food, we don't want to stick to just one kind of thing. We don't want to only eat carbs or only eat protein or only eat sugar. I'm a big fan of the idea of living life rhythmically. When we think about self care, not as this single event, I go into the mountains and hammock for 3 hours, but instead as a rhythmic pattern of how I'm living. This also goes for our emotional diets. And one of the things that's really important too is a lot of us don't really like vegetables very much. A lot of us choose to avoid emotional states or situations that elicit certain emotions because those emotions are bad. I hate to break it to you, but there's no morality when it comes to our feelings. There's not a good set of feelings and a bad set of feelings. Sure, there's easier feelings to have and feelings that I might desire more than others, but that doesn't mean that the undesired feelings are bad. They're just harder, but they're also really important to my overall well being. I can't go through life constantly avoiding feeling angry, feeling sad, or feeling disgust. Those are sometimes part of a healthy diet. For me to go into the world and see something that disgusts me drives me to make changes in my life or in the world around me. And yet, so often we try to avoid or we try to constipate those feelings so that we don't have to deal with it. We're still feeling it, we still took it in. We just don't do anything with it other than try to ignore it. So, what if you're already constipated? What if you realize, yeah, I've been bottling it up, I've been compartmentalizing for so long. And now that I think about it in this structure, I've been emotionally constipated for a very long time. Well, with constipation, it's not as easy as just go sit on a toilet and it'll come out. Sometimes you need to do other things in order to be able to allow your system to release this waste that you've been holding on to. So you might need a laxative where you watch a sad movie because you will be helped in your ability to cry and you're attaching that to whatever sad thing has been building up in your gut. It might mean scheduling some time to verbally process with a safe person where you say, hey, I need to talk through something that's been really bothering me. Will you sit and talk with me? And as long as that person is able to validate you and offer a different perspective, there's so much research that shows that that's incredibly helpful to us. If we're not in a critical state, some of these things are only 5-minute endeavors. Sitting with myself for a couple moments a day and just allowing myself to process my feelings of that day, being able to verbalize them where I need to verbalize them. In critical states of emotional constipation, you might actually need a doctor. You need a therapist. You need to go talk to somebody who knows emotional digestive tracts well enough to be able to help you get what's built up out, and then to establish healthy rhythms of intake, digestion, processing, and releasing. You might also be in a place of emotional constipation that is really dangerous, where you have a symptom called alexithymia. Alexithymia is just an inability to put words to a state of being. And we get to this point in our emotional states, and especially if we haven't built up our emotional intelligence to be able to give clear language to our feelings. I don't just feel mad, I feel vindictive. It's a very different feeling that we're talking about now. And it allows us to do so much more with it. So if we're in this place of constipation, you might have alexithymia. And one of the best things that you can start doing is using something like a feelings wheel to be able to start finding language for those feelings that you're having day to day. Being able to give a clear picture to yourself and maybe even to others. This is what I'm feeling. This is what's happening. I don't know what to do with it, but I know that's what I'm feeling. It's actually a really great start. One essential takeaway from this video that I hope you take that applies in both arenas: don't poop with your phone. It's silly, but think about what happens when we literally poop with our phones. It's also an avoidance of what's happening in that moment. We're actively disengaged with the process that our bodies are trying to engage with, which isn't actually helpful to us. Sometimes it can make things last longer. The same is true with our emotional pooping. If we're distracting ourselves, if we're trying to just comfort ourselves by not focusing on it, are we really doing anything different than the constipating? When I choose to avoid avoidance, I know that I'm moving away from emotional constipation and towards healthy digestion. That's something that we miss when we're emotionally constipated is that our emotions are giving us signals. They are trying to tell us something. When I feel vindictive, it's saying that there is some complaint that I feel is justified that is not being given validation, right? For me to be able to take that as information helps me to make better decisions, helps me to make meaning out of the discomfort that I'm experiencing in that moment. When we allow space to actually feel what's happening in our systems, it allows us to come up with really natural paths for what to do with those feelings. And sometimes we are in a place where we just can't do anything, or those emotions are just nasty and we just have to make a mess. And honestly, that's okay. I mean, sometimes our emotions don't come out pretty. Sometimes it is built up so much that it is a stinky, awful mess and it hurts. And those are moments where we want to be careful not to poop on other people, but to group poop, to be able to invite other people into the process, but in a way that's not just taking our stuff and putting it on them, but instead allowing them to be sources of comfort and support with us in the midst of this process we're on. This might be where the analogy breaks down because I don't know if I'm going to accept anybody's invite to encourage them while pooping. Emotionally, for sure. Physically, absolutely not. But to be able to have people that will come into the space that feels uncomfortable and to say, "You got this. I'm here with you. This does suck. It's okay. You're going to be all right." We need that comfort far more often than we admit. And in this sort of situation, it is especially true. Emotionally, keeping a log of those times where you are releasing your emotions, you're expressing, you're emotionally pooping, can be really helpful to understand in hindsight. Oh, yeah, I did have a really hard day at work the day before. I wonder if it just took a little bit for that to process. And that's why I was grumpy on Saturday, because it felt like that week was just all gross and nothing was moving my way. All of a sudden, when you write it down, we get some perspective on that. And now we can actually do some stuff with that, not just sit with, oh, my tummy hurts, my heart hurts. All right. Thank you for joining me on this kind of bizarre, weird, gross analogy. I really do hope that it's helpful to you. I hope that you think about it a little bit and you try to figure out, how does this work for you? How can you use this language to help you understand better the emotional system that you have of intake and output? There are two versions of this video. This is the extended one. If you want to share this with a friend, but you don't think they're going to sit through the whole thing, you can send them the shorter version that just has the basic idea encapsulated within it. I hope that you will continue to process this information, that you will digest what I've said, and that you will find some way to express what's happening inside your system and that you get it out. And you know what? If you explain this to a friend and you start laughing through it, it's all good. You're welcome to make fun of me for it. It's a really silly analogy, but it works and it ties in. And I know for a fact that you will not think about compartmentalization or bottling it up the same way ever again, which is ultimately my point. Because I think this system actually brings in a more holistic view of what's happening in those situations and creates an emphasis on we need to do something differently. If you've made it to the end of the video here, just know that I'm really grateful for you. Thank you for engaging in this video for as long as you have. I hope that you have a really, really satisfying emotional poop today or tomorrow, but it should be soon. I'll see you later.